So I have just hit the record button. Thanks everyone for joining. Mr. Bill Mead is going to give us a talk today on the magic that is Firebase. Take it away, Bill.
Hi, everybody. So great to see you all here. It feels like a reunion from different eras. Mario and I saw Adjunct just hopping in from AI, and we've got Brittany and Katie from Sierra College, and Linda and Taylor and Wesley. You're at UC Davis too, right?
No, I'm actually from Wisconsin, but I just want to learn about cool. Firebase, so don't mind me.
That's all right. No, that's fine. This is really great. Okay, let me share my screen, and oh, you have to turn on screen sharing. You have to enable it, Nolan.
There, try that. Sorry.
That's right. Intro to Firebase. All right, so let's just really quickly, just a little bit about me. I think what's really important for this group, and most of you in this group know this, is that I'm not a professional developer. I don't do web design. I don't, build websites for a living. So the way that impacts me and the way that impacts what I talk about for this group in general is that, like, I'm not likely to present stuff on React or Bootstrap or one of these 6 million build tools that people are so nuts about. I'm really interested in sort of how can we sort of, I really am trying to learn JavaScript as thoroughly as I possibly can. So, whereas sometimes people would say, oh, you could do that so much easier with Vue.js. Like, I'd actually rather learn how to make Vue.js than to actually use it to make something easier for myself, because I'm not on a deadline to actually make something for a client. That's kind of nice. And I teach at the various colleges around town, and I'm at Mead on most social media, including Twitter and Facebook and all those places. LinkedIn. I'm kind of a LinkedIn junkie, so feel free to connect to me there if you haven't already. So that's about me. Okay, so what is Firebase? In 2000, I think this was supposed to be 2011. That's supposed to be 2011. These two people, James Tamplin and Andrew Lee, launched a startup named Involve that included this sort of real-time chat service for websites. But they found out that people were using it for things other than chat, to do things other than chatting. So this product evolved into Firebase, which was, this is supposed to be 2011, because Firebase was released in 2012, like a year later, and got millions in funding. And by the way, I got these details just off of Wikipedia. I didn't do a ton of research, but just to sort of show you where it's sort of come from. So they got a whole bunch of money in 2012, and then Google acquired the company in 2014 and added significantly to the product. They added additional products in with Firebase. And then in 2016, Google added Firebase Analytics and really positioned Firebase to be their premier backend as a service solution. So that you could sort of build apps on top of it and do that kind of thing. And in 2017, they added Cloud Firestore as a document-based successor to the original real-time database product that came with the original Firebase company. So, and we'll talk a little bit about what those things are in just a minute, but just the point of this is that it's a product that is under active development and it's owned by Google. So, like, it's not going anywhere bad probably anytime soon. Like, it seems to be something they're really investing in and building on. So that's cool. The other thing that's cool about it being owned by Google is that if you have a Google account, which most of us have at least 5 by now, at least I do, then you can actually get into it really easily, and it doesn't cost nothing to do something with. So what I wanted to do first was I wanted to take something, sometimes when I teach sort of more traditional web application stuff with PHP and MySQL and that kind of fun stuff. I'll have people build kind of a simple web page that does, you know, this kind of stuff, and this data is coming out of a database here. And so I wanted, when I started working with this, I started doing this last winter. What I wanted to do was take something I had before, made in more of a traditional way, and then see if I could make it again just using Firebase. Seems like that could be a good way to learn how to do this thing. And I haven't gotten completely all the way there, but I wanted to show you this quickly just so you could see the features. So this is the PHP version. Up here you can see it's index.php, and it's got a login, Mead, and pass. It's not super secure. It's got this nice pagination feature. It's got this nice, so like if I misspelled Nolan's email address in here or something like that, you know, it's got this nice inline editor where I can come in and change this to something else and click save, and it will save it. It's got this nice feature for sorting by the different columns. You know, so there's that kind of thing. And then if you want to delete some people, you can select a bunch and choose delete. So, you know, what we're seeing here are kind of, you know, even though this is kind of just a very basic, it's not very exciting app, but it's got sort of all the features you would need if you were doing a database, which we, you know, generally call CRUD. You can create records, we can read from the database, we can update records, and we can delete records. And that's what you would, you know, you would need those kind of basic features for anything. It even has, if I log off and log in as a different person, a screen, it's got some different levels of login. So Sarah Green has a lower level of access, and all she can do is sort records and look at them. She can't add records or delete them. But over here, and I forgot to show you the add record thing. Add record here, you can click on that and you can add a record. Joe Jones. Email. Add record. I don't know if I didn't, I guess I have some validation in there to keep me from doing weird zip codes, but it would add the record. It's got some validations, that kind of stuff. So that's what I wanted to sort of build with, and do the same thing with Firebase. This has a PHP file behind there, and it's got a MySQL database and all of that kind of stuff. So to do this, you have to get comfortable with SQL commands, and you have to know some PHP and do all that kind of stuff. And it has to run on a server, so either you have to have a local server running MAMP or XAMPP or something like that, or you have to put it up on an actual server somewhere. But on my desktop, I have the version that I made with Firebase, and we'll just take a look at how far I've gotten. I haven't gotten all the features yet. These examples, and I'm going to give you these examples in a few minutes so you can actually play around with them. And we're going to kind of look at how I got here, sort of building through these. But I just want to show you the fifth one here. And the thing that's important to note right off the bat here is it's just an index.html file and a couple JavaScript files and a style sheet. And then in the images folder, there's, you know, the icons. That's it. Like, there's no PHP, there's no MySQL, you know, and I can just run this right off of my desktop because it's going off to the database and getting everything. So this is that file running right on my desktop here, and you can see I have it set so that it does actually sort the records, and I can add a record. Nolan.
I've been used twice in the demos already. I feel so honored.
Yeah, isn't that awesome? Nolan at somewhere.com. There we go, add record, and you'll see Nolan got added down here. And it's got the inline editing, so if I misspelled his email address, you know, I can come in there and fix it and save it. So it's got that. It's got the delete feature, so I can come in here and grab a few records and delete the selected records, ask me if that's okay, and then you'll see they will actually, takes a second, but they do go away. So that's as far as I've gotten. I haven't done the login stuff, and I haven't done sort of the levels of login, and I don't have the pagination yet. I had started this sort of exploring this last winter, and then, you know, we got hit by the end of the world, and so I haven't gotten as far with it as I had wanted to, but I can show you that much, and we got that far, so that's pretty cool. So that's where I am now, and let's take a look at how we go about getting there. So we looked at that stuff. So how do you get started with Firebase? It's actually really, really easy to get started. I have it over here. So basically, if you just, stupid Zoom's in the way. If you just are logged into a Google account, hey, get out of there, dog. Dog's eating my dinner. If you log into Google and then just go to firebase.google.com, you'll notice on the right-hand side, there's actually a go to console line right there. So I can click on go to console, and that puts me into this console where you won't have any projects yet, but you can start to make some projects if you want to. And we'll just make a project really quickly here. And I have all of this on my slides, and I can share out my slides for you too. In fact, let me go and get that link real quick. These are the slides. In case anybody wants that, I'll just put that in the chat here. So those are the slides, if you want that. And then, okay, yeah, so we go to the console and we can make a project. So I'm just gonna make a project, and you give your project a name. I'm gonna just call it chickens. And continue. At this point, we can turn off, we're just making something to play around with, so we don't need Google Analytics, so I just turn that off. But you could leave it on or turn it on later if you need to turn it on for your project, but I'm gonna turn it off. And then create my project. And it takes a second for it to actually create the project. But what's cool here is with Google allowing us to do this, you know, basically it doesn't cost anything unless you're using kind of a lot of data each month. So you could make apps for free and mess around with them yourself, and you know the chances that you're going to run up against some sort of limit is, you know, just by messing around with it yourself is pretty unlikely. Okay, so that made my app. And then what I'm going to do from here is they have these different products that you can add to your app over here. The new version of the database is Cloud Firestore, and that's a document-based database. And I haven't played around with that one yet. Since this database that I'm making over here is basically just one table, it's, you know, it's basically a flat file. I figured I don't really need that for right now, so I haven't done that yet. But if you're making a more complex database, then the Cloud Firestore would be the way to go, because then you can have kind of all kinds of complex relationships between pieces of data. The real-time database is the older one, and that's what I've been working with. And it's basically a fairly flat file. You can have, I think they say they don't recommend going up to more than 2 or 3 levels deep with your JavaScript objects that you put in here. with the layers of data. So you have to actually unnormalize your data for this thing, which is kind of a weird idea. But anyway, that's what we're going to use, is the real-time Fire database. So if you click on that, we can create a database. And then here, this is where you choose whether you want to have it started in lock mode or in test mode. When it's in lock mode, you have to have permissions in order to write and do stuff with the database. We're just going to start in test mode. It means anybody could write anything to my database. So basically, when I send you these files, like you could go in here and delete all these records, and then they'll be gone from my database. Like, you know, it's really completely open. But yeah, we can do that kind of thing. But for right now, like, it doesn't really matter. This is just test data. There's nothing important in there other than Nolan's email address. So we'll start in test mode. And if I click enable here, it'll take a minute to go, and it'll put me here. And here I have an empty database. And I'm going to give you this data in just a minute so you can play around with it if you want to. But here's where I would import some basic data. So if I had some data for this thing here that I wanted to import, I could do that here. And I can actually do that here. So I'll click on this thing here, and I can import JSON. And I'm going to give you guys this file in just a minute so you can actually play around with it for yourself. But I've got this initial data JSON. If I click open and import, and you'll see that it created this object called employees. And if I open that up, it's got some records in here to start with. And it gives the records a number kind of automatically. If I go look at that file, file, open, desktop, oops. Again, I'm going to give you this file, but you can see it's just a JSON file, basically, with some data in it. That's all it is. Just very simple. So I just imported this JSON file here. All right, so cool. So now I have some data in my database. What do I do now? Okay, what we have to do next is we have to set up an app for our database. And we do that by clicking on this little icon up here. Actually, before I do that, let me go back to my slides. And you can see here that these slides have these screenshots. This one's changed a little bit. Now they have both the database. They used to have something here called database, and in there they had both the real-time and the object store in here, the cloud Firestore in there, but now they've separated them out. So that screenshot needs to be updated. Start in test mode, we did that, import JSON. And so we've done this, cool. And we have some data, that's awesome. So now we're going into project settings. So that's where we are on our slides here. So I'm going to come over here to project settings, and I'm going to create an app. Now what's cool about this is you can, if you know how to build iOS apps, you can actually use the SDK and build an iOS app that talks to your Firestore database. Or if you know how to build Android apps, you can do that. I'm going to build just a web app. That's what this icon is for here. And I believe this is for Unity. I don't know.
Yeah, it's Unity.
Yeah, I think that looks like the Unity icon. So I'm going to click on web app here, and you register your app. Chicken app. And you could also set up hosting. I haven't tried that yet. But like if you wanted to have an app where people are uploading photos and doing that kind of thing, I assume you would do that. And you register the app. Sweet. So now we have this code here and we're ready to go. We're actually ready to connect to our Firebase database here. And I'm just going to copy this stuff. Whoops. Click that thing. I guess that's all I need to do. I'm going to come back to my slides here because there's a gotcha here that's really kind of important not to miss. So we registered our app. We get this code. Okay, and so here, this is where we are. So now I'm ready to start making my app. So I'm going to go over to my code editor over here. I'm just using Visual Studio Code, and I just have an empty folder. This is an empty folder on my desktop called Chicken App. And I'm going to make a new file just called index.html and stick it in there and add some basic HTML to that file. And then I'm going to go ahead and paste down here at the bottom this code. And this is really what I need in order to get my Firebase to work. So this thing will actually go to the, go get my Firebase credentials, I guess, or loads the Firebase stuff. And then this is actually my credentials for logging into this particular database here, which is completely open because we've left it that way. So obviously, if you are making something that you don't want other people to just be able to write records to, you have to choose the lockdown thing or go back and set it to lockdown later. You just have to poke around in the console there where you can set it to lockdown. We can look at that in a minute. I've forgotten where it is, but we can find it. But the real gotcha is you have to add the SDKs for the Firebase products you want to use. So at this point, the only product we're using is the what's it called? The database, right? The Firebase database. So we have to add this line here. And it's really hard to, it takes me a long time. Every time I do this, it takes me a long time to find this line of code that you need to actually add. But the nice thing is that it looks just like this line, except it says firebase-database.js at the end. So we can actually just come in here and copy this line and paste it. And then just change it to Firebase-database. And that will actually work. Just to show you where in the instructions you get this, and I have to say the documentation for this thing is not great, sadly. It's just, I'm afraid it's just not nearly as friendly and straightforward as it should be. I wish it was better. But if I come over here, this is their documentation. And if you poke around enough, you'll find the setup stuff. And then down here, it'll tell you about adding the correct things. And it'll show you like the Firebase analytics and the Firebase authorization and the Firestore, but where's the one that just says database? And how do you know that that's what it's supposed to be called? If you keep coming down here, you'll see all of the different available libraries are here, and here's the database one. The other thing to pay attention to that's a little bit weird that I don't really understand is these version numbers change frequently. You'll notice my slides, which are from like this spring, they were on version 7.8, and now they're up to 18. So within like, during a global pandemic, while the world is ending, they've put out 10 versions of this Firebase thing. And it seems to work fine with the older ones. I just make sure this number matches that one when I put this thing in here. But it does, I don't know what they're doing with all these versions or what's changing, and it doesn't seem to really affect using it, but every time I go to set this up, it gives me a newer version of this stuff. I don't know, Nolan, if there's any kind of weird thing that I should be knowing about that is about that, but it's something that I've noticed. But in any case, you have to sort of link up the product that you're going to use. In this case, we're using the database. And if you were going to add the authentication, you would add a link for the authentication files. If you were to add, if you want to add the storage, you would add a link to that, so you'd add these different links for these different things. But now we're ready to actually start making an application here. And this script doesn't have to stay here at the bottom of the page. You can put it in its own separate script file, just as long as these scripts load before that script and initializes, before this whole script initializes your database. Okay, so there's all that kind of thing. So yeah, so we get that connection script and we're ready to start making our database. So when I was sort of looking into this last winter, I found this very basic tutorial about how to do CRUD on with Firebase, part 1, reading data. And I went through and made this guy's little app that he has here so that, he's got a little animation here showing what he's building. And it was helpful. His code was really kind of messy and sloppy and all over the place, but it was helpful because I, poking around in the documentation for Firebase, I didn't find a lot of really great examples that were just kind of simple. And I don't know, maybe they've built it out a bit more since then. Maybe that's what they're doing with the other 10 versions of this. I'm not really sure. But anyway, there we go. So, yeah. So the next thing I want to just show you is I just want to go through and here's the link to download the example files. So let me get that link for you. Open link in a new tab. Where'd it go? I think I have to get out of screen share, out of escape. That's this link here. I'm going to put this in the chat. So that's just a zip file that you guys can download so that you can open these files and look at them and see how they work, and see this, how far I've gotten with it, which isn't terribly far, but it's something. You can sort of see how I built it up from what I had. Okay, so, and I'm going to just go through and open those files and take a look at them. But in the slides here, we go back into presentation mode and exit full screen. There we go. On the slides, I just show kind of the key pieces of code from those files. But I'm going to actually, while we're here in the presentation, I'm just going to open the files and look at them for a few minutes here. So we can go through and sort of see each version here. Let's see. I'm going to get rid of that. Sure, we can save that in case we need to come back to it. Open. So I'm just going to open, starting with one. Oh, there it goes. So yeah, so I have, so you can see here at the bottom, I also have jQuery plugged in, which I got rid of a little bit later for, I really don't like using jQuery anymore either, but you can see here's the Firebase, and you can see when I made this one, it was at version 7 point something. That's even older. And this says 7.6.1, but that should probably be 7.7.0 to match that. And then I have everything inside of app.js. So rather than put that code at the bottom, I have it here at the top of this app.js. So this is that same code that they gave me with the initializing Firebase here. And then in order to sort of, let me just open this file in the browser so you can actually see how far this one went. Open file. Company one. So all this file is doing is reading the records from the database. Oh, cool. Lynn's adding stuff. That's awesome. This is just reading records from the database. That's all it's doing. So step one is how could I just get some data out of the database? And over here, you can see what I've done here is I've made a database that's going and getting the database reference here. I'm getting the child of the database, which is the employee's records. Remember when we went in over here, Firebase console, where was I? Chickens, storage, no, database. Employees, we've got this employees object here. So we're going and getting that employees object. And you, so we're getting the employees object. And then this is just getting my T body because my index page over here just has basically an empty table in it, right? So we're getting the T body empty. We're getting that body for the table there, and I've got a counter. And then this thing performs somewhat of a loop. It doesn't look like a loop, but it actually performs a loop. And it's on child added. So the way the real-time database works, and the reason why it's called real-time database, is that your code is actually listening for changes. So anytime a record is added, this function runs, and it'll loop through and get all the records from the database. And this thing snap is actually something that goes with Firebase. And we pass in this snap variable here, and we're getting the value, let employee equal snap.val. So that's getting the values out of that. And this thing here, if we were to console log it out, it would basically be that JSON object of the whole table with all the data in it. And then the row, create the row, and then inner HTML, I'm making a TD with the counter. So the counter starts at 1, employee first name, close the TD, employee last name, employee email, close the TD, increment the counter, and then empty table, employee table, append the row. So it's going to loop through and actually create all the rows. So that's what's actually going on with this version. Very simple, just a very simple function here that loops through and gets the records and creates the table. What do you guys think? Does that look super confusing, or does that seem fairly straightforward?
No, it looks pretty similar to what I would do with a jQuery loop to do similar things of adding dynamic content to my app after I hit an API of some sort. It's pretty similar.
Yeah. I mean, I think it looks fairly basic to me. I mean, it's a little bit weird that it doesn't look like a loop, but that's okay. So that's the first version. Let's take a look at the second version. So over here, not that one, not that one. Where did I have it over here? Company database, that's 1. Change this to 2. So we'll look at the second version. And in the second version, I added the, I added the add record. So this is the version that allows us to actually add a record into the database. So let's take a look at the code to add a record. And I'm just going to do open, and we'll do company 2 open. And so the index hasn't changed, style hasn't changed, all this other stuff hasn't changed. We've got some jQuery in here to handle that thing sliding up and down, which I basically just stole out of the one from the PHP version. And over here I have, okay, so here, this is our, I just kind of cleaned this up a little bit and I added the email address, but that's basically that piece there. To create a record, all I'm doing is I'm getting my add user button and getting my inputs from the fields from that from the form, right? And then I'm adding an event listener when I submit. This is actually my form here. So when I submit the form, I am I've got an empty object called new user. And then here's my database connection. So this is the actual connection to the database with the employees object in that database. You can have other objects in the database, but this is all of the employees. In this case, I just have the one employees object in the database. So I'm getting that into database, and then I just have a loop that's looping through the inputs and basically building out this new user with a key and value, just basically filling out this empty object with the data from the form. And then to actually put it into the database, I just do db push new user. And then there's a callback function that, and this is really handy. So this thing is actually going to push that record to the database. And then the database is going to then get the record. But once that's done, once that's successfully completed, it runs a callback function. And that's really kind of useful. Over here, you can see I'm passing in event, but I have event prevent default commented out, because if I don't do that, basically, I need to have a way of updating the front end programmatically. So let me just show you what I mean by that. If I come over here and add a record, I'm just going to do a tab BBB. Okay, when I click add a record here, it's going to send the record to the database, but then it's actually going to refresh the screen. So I'll click add record, and it actually did not stop the normal behavior of the form. So it refreshed the screen, and when it refreshed the screen, it got the record. So over here, if I uncomment this, that will stop the normal, because I'm passing in the event prevent default for the submission of the form, that will stop the form from behaving normally. So then I have to actually do something down here to tell it to actually, refresh, to actually get the data again or do something like that. So let me add another record. BBB, CCC. .com and zip code, add record. Oh, you know what? I didn't refresh this. That's why. Let me do that. Cancel. There we go. Let's do it again. I don't think I have any validation in here. See, so it added the record, but it didn't close the form, and it didn't clear out the form. So with that prevent default, I have to actually physically empty out the form and close the form in order to kind of deal with that. So that's why I had that commented out. I don't know, does anybody have any questions about that one so far? Is this interesting at all?
Yeah, very.
Keep going.
Yeah, it's excellent.
Okay. All right, so I'll keep going, assuming you guys are all on board with that. Okay, so that's version 3. So, version 2. Let's take a look at version 3. So version 3 adds a bit more. So in version 3, I have the sorting figured out, so we can sort the records. in the different things. I guess that's it for version 3, is I just added the sorting. Let's take a look at how to do that. Open company 3. Oops. So for this version, here's what I'm doing for this sort. The actual sort happens down here. So database ref employees order by child, and I'm passing in a variable there. And then I put this inside of a function that takes that as a parameter, that order thing there. And where that's coming, and then what I'm actually passing in is I've got a function up here that does sort order that's looking at the parameters up in the URL. So basically, you'll notice up here that this question mark first name is up here. So, you know, when I click on last name, you'll see it gets sort last name. So I'm just grabbing that query, that if there's parameters up there, get those parameters, put them into sort order, and then return that variable. If it doesn't get parameters, just return L name and sort by last name by default. So then I just pass in this sort order here, you know, sort order equals get sort order. So I'm passing in this variable here when I run this function down here. Display users child added sort order. So I'm running this function here. So that's just taking this and then displaying it in a different sort order. Now you might be wondering, well, this seems kind of cumbersome because every time I'm clicking on one of these things, it's basically refreshing the page, which is making another hit to the database and getting all my data every time. And honestly, my PHP version did the exact same thing. So I guess I feel fair enough in that I'm doing that. I'm doing the same thing I was doing with the PHP version. Now, would it be more sophisticated to get the data from the server, put it in some sort of object locally in your JavaScript, and then sort that data on command? Probably yes. That would probably be better. But I decided this was good enough for government work to kind of get going with it. So that's basically how that version is working. Does anybody have any questions about that or anything they want to add? The rest is all the same. So yeah, you feel free to poke around in those files later on your own when nobody's watching you on Zoom. But meanwhile, let's take a look at example 4. A lot happens in example 4. So example 4 over here, company, whoops. So in company 4, this one has the nice inline editing. You know, so I can come in and change somebody's name to something else and save it right in line. So that's kind of nifty. I love that feature. It's got kind of a nice interface to it. So that's kind of awesome. I like that. So let's take a look at that one real quickly. So for version 4 here, if we take a look at how we're doing that, so the sort order stuff has stayed the same. The display users has stayed basically the same. The only difference here is I've added an extra thing here with the edit icon in there. Display users, add users is the same. So now I've added 2 event listeners that are delegated event listeners. Basically, I'm putting an event listener on the entire window, or yeah, the entire document add event listener. And then I'm checking to see if the target matches either the edit icon or the save icon. Because over here, you'll notice two things happen. When I click edit, something happens. And then when I click save, something happens. So I'm listening for those two clicks on those two icons. And I'm either setting the form up when I click the edit icon, or I'm updating the record when I click on the save button icon. So now I've got two functions down here for setting these things up. And the setup form basically goes and finds that row and replaces the inner HTML with the bits of a form. So we've got input elements in here for each of the fields with the data that was currently from the record in those input items as values. So that's how you get the inline editing. And the other thing to note is over here in the HTML, what changed is I actually took this entire table and wrapped it inside of a form element so that I could just, when you click on one of these links, the edit link, it actually goes and finds that row and then sticks the, changes the HTML to add input tags with the data inside of those input tags, and then changes the last one from the edit icon to the save icon. So that's what the set form does, is it goes and finds that row in the table and does that. And then the save icon runs the update record. And the magical thing about updating is really just this thing down, where is it? Update record. So this is the actual thing that does the updating. This right here. User ref is really my link to my database. Employee/record ID. So I'm actually updating just that one record for that one user. User ref dot update, the updated record. I'm passing in the data for that record to get updated. And then there's a callback function that goes to the actual HTML and puts it back the way it was with just the table cells and the edit icon again. So getting rid of those form fields. So that's how that gets turned back. So when it's done saving to the server, the callback function just puts the form back the way it was, just as we're seeing it over here. You know, if I click edit on Nolan again here and change this to something else. So when I click save, it's saving it to the server, but then going back and writing that, you know, just replacing that row back with normal TDs again at the end. So that's basically all that's going on to do that. But what's really cool here is that, like, updating the record, we're just getting the record ID, getting that particular record, getting all the form fields. I've got an empty object, getting the key and the value, and then looping through and putting those keys and values into that updated record thing there. Changing this, you know, this thing here to have the key and the value so that it has all that stuff in there, and then passing it in here and updating it. So it's really fairly simple to do an update. Of course, I don't have any kind of data validation going on in here at all. So you could have duplicate records, you could have empty records, you could have, you know, so we haven't dealt with any of that stuff, but the actual updating is pretty easy. Okay, so that's version 4. We've got one last one to look at, which is version 5, which is the first one I showed you, this one here, company 5, which is as far as I've gotten, sadly. Thank you, pandemic. Open company 5, open. And you'll see what this one has added is the delete stuff. I also got rid of jQuery. Prefer not to use jQuery where possible. So instead, up here I have this stuff added. handle sort of opening and closing the interface. The slide down for the open the new record thing. So I added that, but the main thing down here is the delete thing. And I was testing this earlier this week, sort of in preparation for this talk tonight. And I noticed that the delete items, I was like, oh, this is easy. All you do is just, delete, you just go in and delete the records. It's no big deal. But I was noticing that it wasn't always deleting all the records. I had just a loop going that would allow you to select the different records, and it would loop through the ones that you selected and just delete them from the database. But I was noticing it wasn't deleting all of them. So I made a little recursive function that that runs down here on a timer, because I thought, well, maybe I'm telling it to delete, doing it that quickly, doing it on a loop that quickly is maybe too much for the connection to the database to handle. So I put a little set timeout here, and it waits half a second and loops through them on every half second. So it waits half a second, deletes the first one, and then increments the counter, and then deletes the next one, and waits half a second, and then increments the counter, deletes the next one after waiting half a second. So it's kind of waiting and deleting them one at a time that way. So it takes a little longer, but that way I'm sure I'm getting all of them deleted. The other thing I thought after I did this is, I wonder if, and this is something I didn't actually check, and maybe I should go back and check it, but it could be that it is actually deleting them, but it's reloading the page so quickly that it reloads the page before it's actually finished done deleting them. And I wonder if I had just refreshed the page, if the records would have been gone.
My thought was just probably something close to that, where like the record, because it's a SQL command, so it's probably doing like a fire and a forget, and you're supposed to wait for a callback of some sort before.
Yeah, so maybe I should just do the set timeout for the callback to actually reload the page. But this one is working pretty well, and you can delete the multiple items, and it does kind of, because it's waiting half a second, it is actually deleting them and showing that they get deleted. Linda's unfinished record, and delete selected records. So it's actually doing them over each half second. And I think if you look in the console log, inspect, okay, I may have that still in there. I guess I don't. I may have commented it out, but I had it actually sort of consoling out that I was going and getting this record and deleting it, getting this record and deleting it, and sort of testing all that stuff. So that's what I have. That's how far I've gotten with it. Hopefully that's enough and is interesting enough. There's tons more to explore. I have yet to build out all the features of this thing. The next thing I was going to tackle was the pagination, because I think that's actually kind of a nice feature. And in order to do the pagination, I did start working on that, and I haven't gotten far enough with it. But I think what I have to do, because you can limit records, but there's no way, as far as I could tell, with Firebase to know exactly how many records you have. There isn't a function that counts records like you have in MySQL, where you can just say, what's the record count? And it'll actually tell you there's X number of records in a table. So you don't have that in Firebase. So I think what I would have to do is go in and actually create an additional object here that basically has one thing in it that has like record count. And I would tell it initially how many records there are, and then programmatically with JavaScript, as you add records or delete records, you update that number. And then you can read that number to tell you how many records there are, to divide up how many pages you want to actually see records. If you want 5 records on a page or 10 records on a page or whatever it is. So you'd have to kind of do it that way, I think. But yeah, that's kind of as far as I've gotten. Let's see if I have anything else in here. So this thing just sort of walks through the sort of key things in here that we talked about. So there's all of that. And yeah, summary. So yeah, so we saw how to connect to Firebase. Just need a basic Google account and set up an actual database project. And then we talked about some of the different products and what they do. We looked at some basic CRUD functionality and some example files, and that kind of gives us sort of the whole thing. I'll stop sharing my screen for a moment and see anybody have any questions or anything that they're curious about. Go for it. No,
I have two questions for you. One, have you used any of the other, I forget what they call them, apps or add-ons that you put in there, like the database stuff and the authorization and the other Firebase? No? Okay, just
so the authorization would be next on my list to go into to replicate that sort of login stuff.
Gotcha.
Okay. But I just haven't gotten there yet.
And then second question. So obviously in your app, we've got some validation written on a couple of the demos so that you don't have like a zip code with 4 digits instead of 5 and that sort of thing in there.
Did I put that in there? I can't remember.
You had it in 1 or 2 of the examples, I think, where you entered some text like alpha characters for a zip code and you got an arrow in one of them. So
well, that was on the PHP version. I don't think I have any of that in this JavaScript one at all yet.
That's actually a good segue. No, the main part of my question. So this is all client-side code. This is all HTML and JavaScript.
Yeah.
And it's going straight from here into a database. In a traditional 3-tiered app, it would go from HTML to PHP or Java or something, and then into your database. And at that middle tier is where I would write the real server-side validation to make sure that a hacker didn't disable JavaScript validation and try to pump garbage into my app. How do you do that with Firebase, since there's no middle tier here?
Good question. I have no idea.
Okay. Fair enough.
And you know, it's an important question, because every time I teach the old school PHP stuff, you know, that's kind of a very important thing.
Yeah.
On the flip side, I don't think if people disable JavaScript, I don't think any of this is going to work.
That's true. But okay, so don't disable JavaScript, but install a proxy between my browser and Firebase and look at the packets leaving my browser. So JavaScript is still on. And as far as Firebase is concerned, it ran. And then I just grab that packet before it actually hits Firebase, and I pull out where it says Bill Mead and Bill's email address, and I put in SQL injection and throw it, or
on the database side, it's not SQL. So there's
not SQL injection, like if you have a form with a URL in it and your Firebase, your JavaScript app is checking those URLs to make sure that they're only coming from the Sac City College website. But if I install Charles on my laptop and filter that out after Firebase is done running, but before it hits the server, and I pull out that Sac City College URL and I put in a URL for some whatever website that shouldn't be there,
X-rated website,
something, and then that would end up hitting Firebase though.
At this point,
yeah. So we'd have to find a way to,
you have to find.
I wonder what they do. I wonder what they recommend for that.
I don't know. I mean, I think it's somewhat less dangerous in that, like, you don't have to worry about SQL injections because it's not SQL. It's all
but you do have to worry about
you have to worry about bad data.
That's cross-site. Is that cross-site scripting?
Cross-site scripting. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I wonder if once you lock it down, if that sort of helps with that stuff. I'm not sure. I don't know.
Okay. All right. I was just curious.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question, and I'm not sure how other platforms are doing that as well. Any of these other, you know, like we looked at the MongoDB hosted, you know, files is kind of the same thing.
True. I don't know what they do either. I'll have to yell at Nick and see what they do.
Yeah, I mean, he might have. Too bad. I wish he had come tonight, because he could have given us some good insight into how this compares to what they're doing over there with the MongoDB stuff. But perhaps there is some of that stuff, or maybe that's what's in the authentication package once you get that sort of going. Maybe there's some stuff in there. I'm not sure. But yeah, it's really important to be able to keep bad data from getting in there. I think it's a little bit less of a problem in this case because if JavaScript is off, you can't do it won't do anything, and you don't have to worry about SQL injection and people like putting in commands that will access and delete your other data because it's not SQL. There are no commands that actually run on the server for this, as far as I can tell. It's just text data that goes to the server. But you could still get bad data in there if somebody really wanted to put bad data in and find a way. They have to work pretty hard at it, I think. But yeah. Other questions or thoughts?
I had a question. I guess not quite Firebase related, but I was wondering why you don't like to use jQuery.
Again, going back to what I said at the beginning, like I'm really trying to learn JavaScript as thoroughly as I can, and to write code that is as lean as possible. And it just seems kind of lame to me to load a whole big fat jQuery library just to make a little form slide up and down, when I can do that with 2 simple functions in regular JavaScript. And JavaScript now, like a lot of the stuff that we used to sort of rely on jQuery for just isn't necessary anymore. jQuery's great for 2 things, I think, still. One is it provides a way into programming for people new to programming. It's a simpler syntax and it provides a nice way in. And then there are a ton of plugins that are already written in jQuery that if you know some jQuery, you can just kind of plug them in, like you want a slider on your page or you want, something that somebody's already created, then like that can save you a bucket load of time. But a lot of the other stuff that jQuery was really good for in terms of sort of the shortened syntax, like we've got a lot of that stuff in plain JavaScript now. It used to be that we needed jQuery to sort of normalize across all the different browsers when we had Internet Explorer 6 and 7 and 8. And now like that's just not such a problem anymore. Like everybody's using pretty standard JavaScript these days. So it's just, I don't know, it's just not as necessary anymore. That's a great question though.
That makes sense.
Any other questions? Brittany, Taylor, Wesley, Evan, and Eddie, I don't know if you guys are there.
There's nothing else in the chat.
Yeah, I mean, like, for a comment, it's like, it was a good presentation. Like, I'll use Firebase once, still getting the hang of it. But I do like your approach of kind of using it without a framework. So I got to actually do that too. So I respect that.
All right, cool.
Yeah, that was great, Bill.
Yeah, it was great. Definitely going to help me out with some learning on my end. So thank you.
All right, cool. I hope it helps. Feel free to play around with the files and mess up my data. Or you can make your own database and plug it in with those files. I gave you some basic data to play around with. You just have to put your own script at the top of the page to connect to your own database, and you can try it out. Cool. Well, chat. I don't know. Let's see what's in the chat over here.
I didn't see anything in there.
Okay.
No questions anyway.
All right.
There are the links in there, of course, for anyone who wants to grab the files that Bill worked on. Go to the chat and you can grab the zip from there, and the Google Doc that has all of his slides in it. Those are also posted in there.
Yeah, that's posted there, and those files are also linked in the Google Slides as well. If you want to download them from there. Cool.
Cool. Thanks very much, Bill. That was great.
Thanks.